Okay, well, let's bring in security and defence analyst Professor Michael Clark, who joins me now. And what do we know about the latest fighting, Michael?
Yeah, well, Simon, it's extending. There's been ferocious fighting to the east of this pocket that the Ukrainians have opened up on the Russian side of the border. And there's fighting to the northwest of it at Koronivo. We know about that. And there seems to be a push, in the other direction, eastwards from this pocket at Plakovo. And so all the indications are that there's quite a lot of fighting going on as the Russians are moving forces from the Vovchansk area, which is a bit further to the east, and they're moving those forces westwards towards this pocket. So the Russians are trying to close in on the pocket, but they are not making any impression on it. And at the moment, the pocket is getting bigger. Now, we don't know how much bigger it might get. At the moment, it's really quite big. It's about 30-odd miles long, about 35 miles long, and it's about 14 miles deep at its deepest. Now, it's not even. It isn't that the Ukrainians control all of that territory, but the Russians aren't in that territory. Or if they are, they're having to fight and they are being captured. And if you look at it in terms of square meterage, somebody was working this out earlier on, and I double-checked it. It is true that about 530 square kilometers have been taken by the Ukrainians, and there's fighting going on in about half as much again. So the Ukrainians are very ambitious.
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? That's really extraordinary, because over the last few years, we've discussed often when we're expecting a Ukrainian counteroffensive, sometimes it hasn't materialized in the spectacular fashion, perhaps, that we expected. This very much is that kind of counteroffensive, and not just in the regions where they were fighting before, but right into Russia, where they completely didn't expect it.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, they've got, as I say, they've got the benefit not just of surprise, but of sheer astonishment. And you see those vehicles going past now on the VT. If you look at those vehicles, you can see they've got lots of scrap metal on their sides. Now, that shows you that they've been in combat already, because soldiers always stick scrap metal on the sides of their vehicles as a guard against incoming missiles. It's what they do. It's the cope cages. They all improvise their vehicles. If those vehicles were coming out of store or from the reserves, they'd look a bit more new. But those vehicles that you can see on those low loaders, they've come from another combat area. So that shows us that the Russians are transferring stuff, heavy metal, from one combat area to the next, which presumably is one of the things that the Ukrainians wanted to achieve, to make the Russians bring stuff away from the areas around Vovchansk where they're fighting, and particularly further south in the Donbass.
That's really interesting. And what does it mean about the landscape of this war, or special military operation, or as now he's calling it, a counter-terrorism offensive, President Putin? So, what does this tell us about the landscape of this ongoing war? Still there 5 days in. Clearly, they believe they've got enough military personnel and equipment to do this for now, and an incursion into Kursk. How does that work with the geography?
Well, it depends on how many troops the Ukrainians are prepared to put into this. I mean, we know that they've got elements of at least three brigades, good brigades, the 22nd Mechanized Infantry, the 88th Mechanized Infantry, and those are both competent brigades, and the 80th Air Assault Brigade. Now, they wouldn't commit quality troops and quality equipment unless they meant it, so they clearly mean it. And the other thing that's happened is that when you look at what else has gone in with those brigades, they've sent in engineering equipment, counter-mining equipment, air defenses, long-range mortars, multiple launch rockets. So the Ukrainians are serious about this. They obviously intend to try to stay for a while. Now, one would guess they're going to dig in, and they're going to try to hold this pocket and dare the Russians to come and get them out of it. Now, the Russians cannot live with that. They must get them out of this pocket. I mean, Putin cannot live with the idea that part of his territory has been invaded. That's not happened since 1941. I mean, June 1941, when Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, that was the last time that Moscow had any of its territory invaded. It's happened again. So the Russians have got to eliminate this, and the Ukrainians, I think, must be calculating that they can make a fight of it, and that they can cost the Russians dearly in getting their territory back. And the Ukrainians will want to keep the way open so they can withdraw at some point in good order. they would hope.
And briefly, Michael, I'm wondering if this might also help in any potential future negotiations for territory and ceasefire.
Well, I don't think so, because the Ukrainians would have to hold on to it while there are negotiations going on. And no, negotiations are not going to start this side of Christmas at the earliest. It'll be next year sometime. And I'd be amazed if the Ukrainians were still holding on to this territory next year.
So then what's the purpose of doing it?
I'm sure they're trying to, make a point, trying to impress the rest of the world, upset the Kremlin, show Russian civilians that this is not a counter-terrorist operation, this is a war, and persuade the Russians that if the Ukrainians have put quality troops there, the Russians have got to bring some of their quality troops to get them out, which means they will not be fighting with their quality troops in Chasiv Yar and Pokrovsk, where the Ukrainians are under such pressure. It's to make the Russians redeploy by giving something that Putin's got to worry about somewhere else.
Interesting stuff. Professor Michael Clarke, thanks very much indeed.